The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by distant stars that twinkled like tiny diamonds against the black canvas. Commander Veltar stood on the bridge of his exploration vessel, his blue-scaled fingers dancing across the control panel as he studied the strange readings appearing on his scanner. His bioluminescent crest flickered nervously, casting shifting patterns of light across his angular features. For 300 years, the galaxy had enjoyed unprecedented peace under the rule of the Galactic Concordat. The great crystal spires of Nexus Prime reached toward the heavens, serving as the seat of power for dozens of advanced alien species who had learned to work together in harmony. Wars were things of the past, remembered only in historical archives and cautionary tales told to the young. But today something was different. Something that made Veltar's ancient instincts scream warnings he didn't fully understand. "Commander," his navigator called out, his voice barely above a whisper. The young Altarian's crest had gone completely dark with fear. "The vessel ahead, it appears to be of Terran origin." The word hung in the air like a poison cloud. Terran. Human. The name that older species spoke only in hushed tones if they spoke it at all. Most of the younger generations believed humans were nothing more than myths, scary stories invented to frighten children into behaving properly. According to the few records that survived the Great Silence, the Terrans had been a primitive species from the outer rim of the galaxy. They were described as violent, unpredictable creatures who fought endless wars among themselves. The stories claimed they had eventually destroyed their own civilization in a final, terrible conflict that left their homeworld a smoking ruin. But Veltar was old enough to remember whispers from his grandfather, stories passed down through generations of Altarian families. Stories of ships that moved like shadows through space, of warriors who never retreated, of a species so dangerous that the entire galaxy had united just to contain them. The derelict ship floating before them was massive, easily twice the size of Veltar's exploration vessel. Its hull was scarred and blackened, showing signs of incredible damage from weapons that had been banned for centuries. Strange markings covered its surface, symbols that hurt to look at directly and seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. "Scanning the vessel now, Commander," reported the ship's science officer. "I'm detecting minimal power signatures, but there are intact sections deep within the hull. Something is still functioning in there." Veltar made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. "Prepare a boarding party. We're going inside." The interior of the derelict was a maze of twisted metal and broken systems. Emergency lighting cast eerie red shadows on the walls as Veltar's team carefully made their way through corridors that seemed designed for creatures slightly larger than most galactic species. The air was stale and cold, filled with the metallic taste of old blood and forgotten battles. Deep in the ship's bowels they found what they were looking for. A vast chamber filled with rows upon rows of cylindrical pods, each one the size of a small coffin. Most were cracked open, their contents long since rotted away or frozen solid. But as the team's scanner swept across the room, they detected something that made everyone freeze. One pod was still active. One pod still hummed with life. The woman inside had dark hair that floated gently in the suspension fluid surrounding her body. Her skin was pale but unmarked, preserved perfectly by whatever technology kept her alive through the centuries. She wore a uniform unlike anything in the Concordat databases, with insignia and symbols that spoke of military rank and authority. "Should we wake her, Commander?" asked the team medic, his hands hovering uncertainly over the pod's control panel. Veltar stared down at the sleeping human, remembering his grandfather's warnings about the species that had once terrorized the galaxy. But curiosity won over caution. "Do it. But be ready for anything." The pod opened with a soft hiss, releasing clouds of vapor that smelled like chemicals and distant worlds. The woman's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises of dark brown that seemed to hold depths of knowledge and pain. She sat up slowly, water dripping from her hair as she looked around the chamber with the calculating gaze of a predator assessing potential threats. Her first words sent chills down the spines of every alien present. "How long was I asleep?" When Veltar told her it had been over 300 years, her expression changed. The confusion and disorientation faded, replaced by something cold and hard that reminded him exactly why his ancestors had feared her people. This was Captain Li Su, according to the identification tags on her uniform. A human military officer from an age when her species had been the terror of the known galaxy. Thousands of light years away, on a peaceful Concordat colony world orbiting a yellow star, families were gathering for their evening meals when death came from the sky. The attack was swift and brutal, carried out with a precision that spoke of military training and careful planning. Buildings burned, people screamed, and within hours the colony was nothing but ash and silence. The few survivors who managed to escape described their attackers with words that hadn't been spoken in 3 centuries. They spoke of warriors who moved like ghosts, of tactics so ruthless they defied comprehension, of an enemy that showed no mercy and took no prisoners. In the depths of space, Captain Lee Su was learning that the galaxy had tried very hard to forget about humanity. But somewhere in the darkness between the stars, other humans had survived. And they remembered everything. Captain Lee Su stood perfectly still on the bridge of the Concordat vessel, her dark eyes fixed on the holographic display that floated in the center of the command room. The 3-dimensional map of local space showed dozens of star systems, each one marked with different colored lights to indicate their status. Green meant safe and peaceful. Yellow meant caution or minor problems. Red meant danger or conflict. Too many lights were turning red. In the 3 weeks since she had awakened from her long sleep, 17 colony worlds had gone completely dark. Each attack followed the same pattern, swift, brutal, and so efficient that very few people survived to tell what had happened. The alien crew members of the ship moved around her carefully, speaking in whispers when they thought she could not hear them. Lee Su knew they were afraid of her. She could see it in their eyes, hear it in their voices when they spoke to her. To them, she was a living reminder of the species their ancestors had worked so hard to forget. A human. A Terran. A member of the race that had once made the entire galaxy tremble with fear. The bridge doors opened with a soft sound, and Communications Officer Thekla walked toward her. The alien's skin was a pale green color, and his large eyes seemed to glow with their own inner light. He moved carefully, like someone approaching a dangerous animal that might attack at any moment. "Captain," he said in a voice that was barely above a whisper. "We are receiving new reports from the survivors on Kepler 442b. The few people who managed to escape are describing their attackers in detail." Lee Su turned to face him, her expression showing nothing of what she was thinking. "What did they say?" Thekla swallowed nervously before continuing. "They described the raiders' tactics as remarkably similar to historical Terran combat doctrines. The way they moved, the way they attacked, the way they coordinated their forces, it all matches the old records from 300 years ago." Something cold settled in Lee Su's stomach. She had spent her entire career in the Earth Defense Force, learning and teaching the art of military strategy. The tactical reports she had been studying over the past weeks had seemed familiar, but she had tried to tell herself it was just coincidence. Now she knew better. The precision boarding actions that left no survivors. The psychological warfare that broke the will of entire populations before the real fighting even began. The way civilian areas were targeted to create maximum terror and confusion. These were not alien strategies. These were human tactics, refined and perfected over generations of warfare. "Show me the long-range sensors," she commanded, her voice steady despite the growing worry in her mind. The holographic display changed, zooming out to show a much larger section of space. At the very edge of the galaxy, where the stars grew thin and the darkness between them stretched for unimaginable distances, something was moving. A fleet of ships, hundreds of them, all moving together in perfect formation. Lee Su studied the display with the trained eye of a military officer. The fleet moved with a kind of coordinated precision that spoke of centuries of practice and refinement. Each ship knew exactly where it was supposed to be when it was supposed to move, and what its role was in the larger plan. This was not the work of raiders or pirates. This was the work of a professional military force. At the head of the fleet flew a single massive ship, a dreadnought that dwarfed everything around it. The vessel was easily twice the size of anything in the Concordat Navy, built like a floating fortress designed for one purpose: war. Suddenly, every communication channel in the sector crackled to life with the same voice. It was a human voice, speaking in perfect standard Galactic, but carrying an accent that Lee Su recognized from her childhood. The voice was strong and clear, filled with anger that had been building for 3 centuries. "People of the Concordat," the voice said, and Lee Su could hear the controlled rage beneath the calm words. "You tried to forget us. You quarantined our worlds, erased our history from your databases, and left us to die alone in the void between the stars. You thought that if you pretended we never existed, you could live in peace forever." The bridge of the Harmony's light fell completely silent. Every alien crew member stood frozen, listening to words that confirmed their worst fears. Humanity had not died out. Humanity had not forgotten. Humanity had survived, and now they had returned. "Today begins your education," the voice continued, "in what humanity becomes when abandoned to the darkness. When forced to grow strong in the empty spaces between worlds. When given 300 years to remember every insult, every betrayal, every moment you pretended we were nothing more than a bad dream. Li Su closed her eyes, feeling a mixture of emotions she could barely understand. Relief that her species had survived. Horror at what they had apparently become. And recognition, terrible, certain recognition of the voice speaking across space. Admiral Beijing, she whispered to herself. She remembered him, though he had been just a child when she went into cryogenic sleep. The grandson of her old commander, raised on stories of Earth's golden age before the quarantine. A bright boy who had dreamed of exploring the stars and making peace with alien species. Now his voice carried the weight of 300 years of fury, and his fleet moved through space like an avenging angel come to collect a debt written in blood and abandonment. The storm had awakened and it remembered everything. The attacks came like clockwork, precise and devastating in ways that made seasoned military officers wake up screaming from their sleep. Admiral Beijing sat in the command chair of his flagship, watching holographic displays that showed 17 different battles happening at the same time across Concordat space. His fingers moved across control panels with the practiced ease of someone who had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. The ship around him was a marvel of human engineering, built in the dark spaces between galaxies where no alien eyes could see. Every surface was covered in armor plating that could stop weapons the Concordat had forgotten how to build. Every system was designed for one purpose, bringing death to those who had abandoned humanity to the void. Jin's face was hard and weathered, marked by scars from a dozen battles fought in the empty darkness. His eyes held no mercy, no doubt, only the cold calculation of a predator who had spent 300 years learning how to kill. Around him, his crew worked with silent efficiency, each person knowing their role in the greater plan that would bring the galaxy to its knees. The Void Fleet moved through space like a living thing, each ship perfectly coordinated with all the others. They struck at mining colonies, trade stations, and military outposts with equal brutality. No prisoners were taken. No mercy was shown. Every attack sent the same message: humanity remembered and humanity had come home. On the bridge of the Harmony's light, Captain Li Su stood surrounded by alien officers who looked at her with a mixture of hope and fear. They needed her knowledge of human tactics, but they could never fully trust her. She was one of the enemy even if she fought on their side. Commander Veltar approached her carefully, his bioluminescent crest flickering with nervous energy. In his hands he carried reports from the latest attacks, pages filled with casualty numbers and tactical analyses that painted a picture of complete military disaster. "Captain," he said quietly, "we need to understand how they are doing this. Our fleets are technologically superior. Our weapons are more advanced. Our shields are stronger. But we keep losing every single battle." Li Su studied the reports, seeing patterns that made her stomach turn with recognition. The attacks followed classic human military doctrine, but refined and improved in ways that spoke of centuries of constant warfare. Every move was calculated to cause maximum damage with minimum risk. "They are using quantum disruption mines," she explained to the mixed-species tactical team that had gathered around her. "The devices are designed to cripple your jump drives and force you into conventional warfare. They know you rely too heavily on superior technology instead of superior tactics." What she did not tell them was how brilliant Jin's strategy truly was. The Void Fleet was not just winning battles, they were systematically destroying the Concordat's faith in their own superiority. Every engagement proved that 3 centuries of peace had made the alien races soft and unprepared. They had forgotten how to fight, how to suffer, how to endure the kind of losses that war demanded. Meanwhile, humanity had spent those same 300 years in the cold darkness between galaxies, fighting for every scrap of resources, every breath of air, every moment of survival. They had become something harder and more dangerous than the galaxy had ever imagined possible. The breakthrough came during the night cycle when most of the crew was resting. Li Su sat alone in her quarters, staring out at the stars through a small viewport. The communication system crackled to life, showing an incoming transmission on a frequency she recognized from her old military days. The face that appeared on the screen was young and beautiful, but marked by the same hardness that Li Su saw in her own reflection. Captain Kim Nari had been born in the void between galaxies, raised on stories of Earth's betrayal and trained from childhood to be a perfect weapon. "Sister," Nari said, using the old Earth Defense Force term for a fellow female officer. "We know you are there. We know you fight alongside the aliens who abandoned our people to die in the darkness." Li Su said nothing, but she could feel her heart beating faster. These were her people, her species, her blood. But they had become something she barely recognized. "We offer you one chance," Nari continued. Join us in our righteous war against those who tried to erase humanity from history. Help us reclaim what was stolen from our ancestors. Or burn with the aliens who cared so little for human lives that they pretended we never existed. The transmission ended, leaving Lee Su alone with her thoughts and her impossible choice. She could see in Nari's eyes the same determination she had once felt when fighting for Earth's survival. But she could also see something else, a coldness that came from growing up in a universe where mercy was weakness and compassion was death. These were not the humans she remembered from 3 centuries ago. These were creatures forged in the crucible of abandonment and rage, shaped by generations of hatred into something that existed only to bring pain to those who had wronged them. Outside her viewport, another Concordat world went dark, its population of billions reduced to silence and ash. The Void Fleet moved on to their next target, leaving behind only empty space and the memory of what happened to those who forgot that humanity never forgave and never forgot. The war was just beginning, and the galaxy was finally remembering why they had been so afraid. The Great Crystal Chamber on Nexus Prime had never seen such panic. The High Council of the Galactic Concordat sat in their towering seats, each one representing a different species that had ruled the galaxy for 3 centuries. Their forms were diverse, some made of living crystal, others of pure energy, still others resembling creatures from 1,000 different worlds. But today they all shared the same expression of desperate fear. Holographic displays filled the air around them, each one showing another disaster. Red markers indicated fallen worlds, and there were too many of them to count easily. 19 colony worlds had gone completely silent. Their populations of billions were either dead or enslaved, taken by an enemy the Council had convinced themselves was nothing more than ancient history. Council Prime Zarthek rose from his seat, his crystalline body pulsing with colors that showed his emotional state. The patterns were chaotic and bright, indicating stress levels that would have killed most organic beings. His voice echoed through the chamber like the sound of breaking glass. "How is this possible?" he demanded, gesturing at the displays around them. "Our fleets are technologically superior. Our weapons are more advanced than anything in galactic history. Our shields can stop the energy output of entire stars. How are we losing to primitive humans?" Elder Yithake, oldest member of the council, slowly shook his ancient head. His species lived for thousands of years, and he was one of the few beings still alive who remembered the time before the Great Silence. "They were never primitive," he said quietly. "We told ourselves they were primitive because it made us feel better about what we did to them." Reports continued flooding in from across Concordat space. Admiral Bei Jin's tactical brilliance was becoming legendary among both human and alien military forces. He had divided the Concordat's attention across multiple fronts, forcing them to spread their fleets thin while his elite strike teams hit the most important targets. Captain Park Hyun led one of these teams, a group of human commandos who moved through space like ghosts. They specialized in attacking industrial complexes, the factories and shipyards that kept the Concordat's war machine running. Every facility they destroyed weakened the alien forces a little more. Commander Lee Min led another team that focused on communication networks and command centers. Her forces moved with surgical precision, cutting the connections between Concordat fleets and leaving them confused and isolated. Without proper coordination, the technologically superior alien ships became easy targets for human tactical superiority. Every victory was broadcast across Concordat space on hijacked communication channels. The transmissions always ended with the same message, spoken in perfect standard galactic by Admiral Jean himself: "Remember us now." The words haunted the dreams of every alien who heard them. They carried the weight of 3 centuries of abandonment, the fury of a species that had been erased from history and left to die in the cold darkness between stars. The humans had not only survived, they had grown stronger, harder, more dangerous than anyone had imagined possible. In desperation, the High Council had summoned Captain Lee Su from the front lines. She stood now in the center of the Great Chamber, surrounded by beings who represented the most powerful civilizations in known space. They looked down at her from their towering seats, these creatures who had once ruled with absolute authority. Now they needed help from a member of the species they had tried so hard to forget. Council Prime Zarthek leaned forward, his crystalline form flickering with nervous energy. "Captain," he said, his voice carrying a note of pleading that would have been unthinkable just months before. "Your people are destroying everything we have built over 3 centuries of peace. Surely you can negotiate with them. Surely you can make them stop this madness." Lee Su looked up at him with eyes that held no sympathy, no forgiveness, only the cold truth that the council did not want to hear. "They are not my people anymore," she said clearly. You made sure of that when you quarantined Earth and erased us from galactic history. Those humans out there, fighting your fleets and burning your worlds? They are what you created when you abandoned us to the void. The chamber fell completely silent except for the steady stream of defeat reports coming from the outer colonies. The sounds of a galactic civilization falling apart filled the air, distress signals, casualty reports, requests for reinforcements that would never come. Finally, Elder Yithake spoke the words that every council member had been thinking but none had dared to say out loud. His ancient voice carried the weight of terrible certainty. We must lift the quarantine. We must return to Earth. The suggestion sent shockwaves through the assembled beings. For 300 years, Earth had been forbidden territory, sealed away from the rest of the galaxy by barriers that prevented any ship from entering the Sol system. The quarantine had been put in place to contain humanity's dangerous nature, to keep them from spreading their violence to the peaceful races of the Concordat. Li Su smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. It was the smile of someone who had watched the mighty fall and felt no pity for their suffering. Now you want to remember where humanity comes from? She asked. Now that your perfect galaxy is burning, you suddenly care about the species you tried to erase? Outside the crystal spires of Nexus Prime, another Concordat fleet met its end in the darkness of space. The price of forgetting was being paid in blood and fire, and the bill was far from settled. The journey to Earth took 3 weeks, and every day brought new surprises that made the Concordat delegation question everything they thought they knew about humanity. Captain Li Su stood on the bridge of the diplomatic vessel, watching through the viewports as they approached the Sol system. What she saw made her heart race with emotions she could barely understand. The outer edge of the solar system was protected by a network of defense stations that stretched across impossible distances. Each station was the size of a small moon, bristling with weapons that looked like they could destroy entire fleets with a single shot. Patrol ships moved between them in perfect formations, their sleek hulls reflecting the light of distant stars. This was not the primitive backwater the Concordat remembered from 3 centuries ago. This was not the wasteland they had imagined after abandoning humanity to isolation. This was something that defied every assumption they had made about what happened to Earth after the Great Silence. As they moved deeper into the system, the truth became impossible to ignore. Massive orbital platforms surrounded every planet, connected by streams of ships carrying resources and people between worlds. The asteroid belt had been transformed into a vast industrial complex, with mining operations and factories that stretched for millions of kilometers in every direction. And around Earth itself, the home world of humanity, hung a sight that made even experienced military officers gasp in wonder and fear. Orbital rings circled the planet like golden chains, each one supporting cities that housed billions of people. Space elevators reached down from the rings to the surface, creating highways between the ground and the stars. Fleet Admiral Choi Sun stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the approach of 2 very different groups of vessels. The first was the battered remains of the Concordat fleet, ships that showed the scars of countless battles against Admiral Beijin's forces. The second was the Void Fleet itself, vessels that had been built in the darkness between galaxies and hardened by 3 centuries of survival warfare. Both fleets were impressive in their own ways, but they were nothing compared to what surrounded them. The Terran Imperial Navy stretched across space in formations that seemed to go on forever. Thousands of ships, from small patrol craft to massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever seen. Each vessel was a work of art and engineering, built by a civilization that had spent 300 years perfecting the tools of war and peace. Admiral Choi Sun was a woman in her 70s, her gray hair pulled back in a simple style that spoke of military discipline. Her uniform was clean and pressed, marked with insignia that represented decades of service to Earth and humanity. Her great-grandfather had been among the leaders who chose to accept the quarantine rather than continue the bloodshed that had once threatened to tear the galaxy apart. But accepting isolation had never meant accepting defeat. Humanity had used the 3 centuries of quarantine to grow, to build, to become something greater than they had ever been before. They had explored every corner of their solar system, colonized every world that could support life, and built a civilization that existed on a scale the Concordat had never imagined possible. In the neutral zone above Earth's moon, 3 fleets faced each other in a meeting that would determine the future of galactic civilization. Admiral Beijin's Void Fleet held position on one side, their ships bearing the scars of countless battles fought in the empty darkness. The Concordat forces remained on the other side, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of their mistake. Between them floated the true strength of humanity, the Terran Imperial Navy, numbering in the thousands of ships and representing the combined might of a species that had never forgotten how to fight, never forgotten how to build, and never forgotten how to survive. Captain Lee Soo found herself serving as mediator between three leaders who held the fate of the galaxy in their hands. Admiral Choi Sun represented Earth's patience and wisdom, the choice to build rather than destroy. Admiral Bei Jin carried the fury of the forgotten, the rage of those who had been abandoned to die in the void. Council Prime Zarthek bore the weight of galactic civilization's survival, knowing that his people's future depended on the decisions made in this moment. The meeting took place aboard a neutral vessel, a small ship that floated in the space between the three fleets. The room was simple and functional, with a round table that allowed all three leaders to sit as equals. But the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Admiral Choi Sun spoke first, her voice calm and steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "The choice before you is simple," she said, looking directly at Council Prime Zarthek. "Accept humanity as equals in a new galactic order, or face the combined might of every human who remembers being abandoned." She gestured toward the viewports, where the massive formations of the Terran Imperial Navy stretched across space like a metal forest. "The Void Fleet was just our children who got lost in the darkness," she continued. "This is what we became while you tried to forget we existed." The negotiations lasted for days, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The Concordat had no choice but to accept humanity's terms. The new Concordat was signed in Earth's orbit, with humanity assuming the role of galactic protectors they had always been meant to play. But the final message broadcast across all worlds carried a warning that would echo through history for generations to come. The galaxy forgot who we are and paid the price in blood. Never forget again. The age of human dominance had begun.